Hello everyone, welcome to this video on timing of marriage as per the principles of Vedic Astrology. So let me put out a disclaimer right away. I'm not an astrologer but only an astrology enthusiast, and whatever I am going to present here today is what I have learned from studying the lectures, videos and books by some of the eminent astrologers of India, most notably the legendary Sri K.N. Raoji. So without much ado, let us get into it straight away. There are some rules which we can use to determine the timing of marriage of a native from his birth chart. And today we are going to look at 10 such rules, and you can see the first 5 on your screen right now, and we'll get to them one by one. The first 2 which are in red are actually based on dasha. The next 3 you see over here in black are based on transit. Again, from rule 6 to 8 are again based on transit, and these 8 rules, the first 8 rules which I have noted here, are actually taken from a book by K.N. Rao, and the last 2 are additional rules which I have come across from different astrologers. So the chart which we are going to use for today to elaborate the rules is in front of you. The date of birth is 7th October 1961. Time of birth 13:30, that is 1:30 p.m. and place of birth is New Delhi. So it is a Sagittarius ascendant, and you can see the chart in front of you, and also the degrees of the planets are mentioned right below. This is the Navamsha chart. It's a Scorpio ascendant, and this is the transit chart on the day of the wedding of this native, which is the 14th of February 1985. Now coming to the first rule. The first rule states that the Vimshottari Mahadasha and Antardasha of the native should be connected to the ascendant or 7th house of D1 or D9. D1 means the Lagna chart and D9 means the Navamsha chart. And you might be aware of the Vimshottari Dasha, which is the most frequently used Dasha system in Vedic astrology. So for this current native, the Vimshottari Dasha which was running during his marriage was Mars Jupiter. So we need to see that both Mars and Jupiter should be connected to either the ascendant or the 7th house of either D1 or D9. So here we see that it is a Sagittarius ascendant. So the Lagna Lord is Jupiter, and the 7th Lord, that is Gemini, is Mercury. So let us look at Mars. So here we see that Mars is situated in the 11th house with Mercury. So Mercury being the 7th Lord, Mars is conjunct the 7th Lord. Thus Mars is connected to the 7th house, right? And as for Jupiter, Jupiter itself is the ascendant Lord. So both Mars and Jupiter are connected to the ascendant and 7th house in the D1 chart. So this rule is satisfied. So next, let's move to the second rule, which is the Chara Antardasha should be connected to Darakaraka in D9 or D1. So there are a few things which I need to clarify. The Chara Dasha is a Rashi based Dasha system most commonly used in Gemini system of astrology. And what is Darakaraka? Basically, Darakaraka is the planet with the lowest degree excepting Ketu. Some astrologers also leave out Rahu, but in my opinion, because it's the Kali Yuga, I think we need to include Rahu in our scheme of things. So here you see that the planet with the lowest degree is in fact Rahu only, which is at 1 degree 13 minutes. So if you look at, this is the Navamsha of the native. If you look at the Navamsha, Rahu is situated in Aries. The Chara Dasha sequence which was running during his marriage was Virgo, Scorpio. So the Antardasha is Scorpio. Now let us look at how Scorpio is connected to Rahu. We can see that Scorpio and Rahu are not in 1-7 position. So there is no direct connection between Rahu and Scorpio. But in Gemini system, we also need to use the Rashi aspects. And from those Rashi aspects, we know that the sign of Scorpio aspects the sign of Aries. And hence, the Scorpio is directly connected to Aries, and the Rahu, which is the Darakaraka, it is placed in Aries. So they get connected by Rashi aspects. So again, this rule is also satisfied. Basically, for this particular rule to be satisfied, what you need to see is, I am talking about only the D9, because if you check in the D1, you will not find any such connection. Sometimes it will be in the D1, sometimes it will be in the D9. So you have to check both. So in this case, we are finding the connection between the Chara Antardasha with the Darakaraka in D9. So let us move to the next rule. The rule 3, which I found working in most of the charts that I have come across, is the transit of Jupiter should aspect the Vivaha Saham. So first of all, what we need to do is we need to calculate the Vivaha Saham. For that, what we need to do is we need to add the longitudes of Lagna Lord and 7th Lord. For the current native, the Lagna Lord Jupiter is placed in Capricorn at 4 degrees of Capricorn. So Jupiter has travelled, we are taking 0 degree of Aries as the reference point. From 0 degree of Aries, Jupiter has travelled 9 signs and 4 degrees. Similarly, the 7th Lord Mercury is placed in Libra. So from Aries, if we consider, Mercury has travelled 6 signs and 23 degrees. Now we are going to add up the both. Adding the both, we get 15 signs and 27 degrees. Now if the degrees was in excess of 30, then we would have subtracted 30 from the degrees and added 1 to the sign, because we know that each sign is 30 degrees. Now, since it is 15 signs and 27 degrees, we can remove multiples of 12 from the sign, because going multiple of 12 takes us back to the original point from where we had started. So subtracting 12 from 15, we get 3 signs and 27 degrees. So the Saham point, the Vivaha Saham, will be in the sign of Cancer. Why the sign of Cancer? Because 3 signs have already passed and we are at 27 degrees. So we are basically at 27 degrees of Cancer, which is the 4th sign. So the Vivaha Saham is in Cancer. During the day of marriage, Jupiter was transiting in Capricorn. Be careful, this is not the transit chart, this is the actual D1 chart. If we look back at the transit chart on the day of the wedding, note that Jupiter is transiting in the sign of Capricorn and Saturn is transiting in the sign of Scorpio. Let us go back. So here we see that if Jupiter is in Capricorn, it will aspect the Vivaha Saham, that is Cancer, by its 7th aspect. So this rule is also satisfied. Now let us move to the rule 4, which has to do with the double transit of Jupiter and Saturn. This rule states that both the transiting Jupiter and the transiting Saturn should be connected to the ascendant or the 7th house, right? So we know that the Jupiter was transiting in Capricorn and the Saturn was transiting in Scorpio, right? Now if you look carefully, the natal Jupiter, which is the ascendant lord of the native, is placed itself in Capricorn. So the transiting Jupiter is also in Capricorn, right? So the transiting Jupiter is transiting over its natal ascendant lord, right? The first part is clear. And secondly, Saturn being in Scorpio, by its 3rd aspect, is also aspecting the natal ascendant lord, which is Jupiter. So both the transiting Jupiter and the transiting Saturn are connected to the ascendant lord. So this rule of the double transit of Jupiter and Saturn is also satisfied. Now coming to rule number 5. This rule states that the transiting Jupiter should aspect the natal Venus in case of males and the natal Mars in case of females. So this is a male chart. So first of all, we'll look at where is the Venus placed in the chart. So we see Venus is placed in Leo, and we already know that the Jupiter transiting during the time of marriage was in Capricorn. But from Capricorn, Jupiter will not be able to aspect the Venus which is placed in Leo. So this rule number 5 is not satisfied in this particular chart. Let's move to the next rule. Ascendant Lord and 7th Lord in transit should get connected to each other just before marriage. On the day of the wedding, this is the transit chart, and you can see that the transiting Ascendant Lord Jupiter and the transiting 7th Lord Mercury both are placed in the sign of Capricorn. Thus, this rule is also satisfied. Next, there should be a cluster of planets in transit near the Lagna or near the 7th house. What do you mean by near the Lagna or near the 7th house? It means either in the Lagna or the two adjacent houses, that is the 2nd house and 12th house, or near the 7th house means either in the 6th house, 7th house or 8th house. So if we look at this chart, we can see that total of 4 planets are there in 2nd house and 12th house. But other planets are distributed all over the chart, and thus we can say that out of the total 9 planets, only 4 are satisfying this rule. So we will take it as the rule is not being satisfied. Generally, if there are 5 or more planets which are satisfying this rule, then we take it as satisfied. So once again, we find another rule which is not satisfied for this particular chart. Let's move to the next one. Rule number 8. The Lagna Lord should transit in or near the 7th house, or 7th Lord should transit in or near the Lagna. So this is again the transit chart, and we see that the Lagna Lord is not transiting near the 7th house. It is actually in the 2nd house. The first part is not satisfied. But if you look at the 7th Lord, that is transiting just next to the Lagna. So again, this rule is satisfied. Let's move to the next rule. This has to do with the concept of Upapada. So if you are unaware of what is a Upapada, let me tell you. Look at the 12th house. You can see it is Scorpio. The ruler of Scorpio is Mars. Now count from Scorpio to Mars. So Mars is placed in the 11th house, which means if you count from Scorpio to Mars, you will come up with 12, right? Like Mars is placed in the 12th house from Scorpio. Once you have established this, count that many number of houses from Mars to arrive at the Upapada Lagna. So if you count again 12 from Mars, you will arrive at the 10th house, that is the sign of Virgo, right? So the Upapada Lagna for this particular native is in Virgo. And as we already know that the transiting Jupiter on the day of the wedding was in Capricorn, and by its 9th aspect, it must have been aspecting Virgo, which is the Upapada Lagna for the native. So this rule is again satisfied. Now let's move to the last rule. This rule states that the Vimshottari Mahadasha and or the Antardasha gets connected to the 5th or 11th house of the D9, that is the Navamsha chart. So we have seen that the Vimshottari Dasha sequence in operation during marriage was Mars, Jupiter. Now we will look for the 5th and the 11th houses. If we look at the 5th house, that is 12. 12 means Pisces. Pisces is ruled by Jupiter, right? The 11th house is Virgo. Virgo is again ruled by Mercury. So now let us look at the Dasha sequence. Mars, Jupiter. Is Mars somehow connected to the 5th house? We see that Mars is not connected to the 5th house. Neither it is sitting in the 5th house, nor it is aspecting the 5th house, nor it is connected to the 5th lord, which is in this case Jupiter. Now let us look at whether it is connected to the 11th house. Mars does not connect to the 11th house either. Now let us look at Jupiter. You see directly that Jupiter is the ruler of the 5th house of the D9. So we can say that the Antardasha is connected to the 5th house of the D9. Hence, this rule is also satisfied. So, if we try to conclude this presentation, we can see that out of the 10 rules which we have used, 8 of the 10 gets satisfied, hence confirming the timing of marriage of the native. Now generally most of the videos which are there on YouTube, they bring up charts where all the rules get satisfied, but in practical you will never find a particular chart having every rule getting satisfied. So you have to be very clear in what you want to find and use the composite technique, which is something proposed by Mr. K.N. Rao, that if I have 10 rules and at least 6 or more of them get satisfied in a particular chart, we can say with a certain degree of accuracy that this timing represents the timing of marriage for the native. And generally speaking, from my experience, what I have seen, if you are in a hurry and quickly you want to determine whether or not the timing is right for the marriage of the native, you can use the rule number 3, that is the transit of Jupiter over the Vivaha Saham, because time and again it has been seen that whenever Jupiter transits over the Vivaha Saham, it tends to trigger the marriage or marriage like event such as engagement, etc. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Please let me know in the comments that whether these rules which I have discussed are useful, apply them to different charts, and let me know whatever is your feedback. Thank you.